So I'm going to go over one of the more complicated research studies that is used in the field of psychology. It is one that we don't often use in cultural psychology, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used. And there have been occasions that we've used experimental studies to infer about different cultures as long as they're utilized in the appropriate manner. So some key aspects about experimental studies that are very important is that of any type of research studies that you learn about, the only research study that can actually state cause and effect is an experimental study. No other type of research study can state cause and effect, that one thing causes another thing to happen. The only type is with an experimental study. And the key is that an experimental study has to have these aspects. It has to meet a certain criteria to be able to state cause and effect. And one of the first important things is randomization, meaning that every single individual, every participant has an equal chance of being in either group, no matter how many groups there are or conditions. Everyone has an equal opportunity to be in those groups. So to be able to do that, the researcher needs to have control. And that means there needs to be what is called a true independent variable. So that means the independent variable is able to be manipulated by the researcher. So this is key, manipulation. So I'm going to put manipulation there, meaning that our independent variable is made up of conditions, and the researcher has control over what those conditions are and can randomly assign people into those conditions. So for example, our independent variable should have a control group and an experimental group. So for example, and this is probably the most common example, is if we're providing a new medication. So let's just say we're looking at a new antidepressant. So we're looking to hopefully decrease depression. But for us to be able to tell whether the antidepressant works well, we need to compare people who take the antidepressant to people who don't take the antidepressant or don't get the antidepressant. And so is what we do as a researcher, we randomly assign people into the control group and the experimental group. The experimental group is the people that get the treatment, the actual treatment. The people in the control group, they do not get the treatment, or they get something that is stands in for the treatment. So often when you're dealing with medication like antidepressants, these people will get what's called a placebo. So it's a sugar pill. So they think they might be getting the medication, but in actuality, it's just a sugar pill. So we can randomly assign people to the control group or the experimental group. And so the researcher has to be able to randomly assign people into one of the groups for the independent variable. Otherwise, we cannot state cause and effect. So for example, maybe I'm looking at aggression levels depending upon gender. Well, I have no control over whether someone is male versus female. And so if I'm saying that males are more aggressive than females, I don't really have a true experimental group, and I don't have a true control group. The people in the sample are being assigned based upon their genetic characteristics, not based upon randomly assigning them to those groups. There's not an equal chance of males being in either the male or female group. They're either in the male group, either you're male or you're not male. And so that lacks randomization. It lacks a true experimental group, which means it lacks manipulation by the researcher. And they can't control for the possibility of other things that are influencing the outcome. And so that independent variable has to be manipulated by the researcher. The whole point of putting people, randomly assigning people into different groups and either giving them a treatment or a placebo is to measure the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is the outcome. This is going to, and the way I always remembered it when I first started learning was the dependent variable depends upon which condition they were in within the independent variable. So this is your outcome. So that is the outcome. What is being measured that you hypothesize will change things. So this is what is considered a true experiment. You have to have all these components to be able to state cause and effect. Otherwise, you cannot state a cause and effect. If you lack manipulation, if you lack randomization, if you lack a true experimental group and a true control group, then you cannot state a cause and effect about your outcome. So hopefully that clarifies, and it helps you to answer some of those questions on the exam.